It's just before dawn in August 1944, in the rolling farmland of Normandy. On a narrow country road east of Falaise, a huge column of German vehicles inches forward in the dark. Trucks, half-tracks, horse-drawn wagons and tanks are jammed together, engines overheating, horses stumbling. Exhausted soldiers slouch in the backs, half asleep, clutching rifles and steering wheels. They've been told this is their way out. Get through the gap, reach the Seine, and maybe you live to fight again. Fall behind, and you're staying in Normandy forever. Then someone hears it. A low hum at first, growing louder. Men crane their necks. Against the faint light of the sky, dark shapes appear, Allied fighter bombers, sweeping in over the ridgelines. The first rockets streak down into the column. A truck detonates in a sheet of flame. Horses scream. Soldiers dive for ditches as cannon shells rake the road. In seconds, the valley turns into a furnace. Burning fuel, twisting metal, bodies in the dust. For the men trapped here, this isn't a retreat. It's a corridor of death. On the heights above, Polish tank crews of the 1st Armoured Division watch through binoculars, calling artillery onto the roads below. They know what they're looking at, the destruction of the German armies that once helped occupy their homeland. Within days, this killing ground around Falaise will become one of the most infamous battlefields of the Western Front, the place where Allied forces annihilated Germany's last army in France. In June 1944, D-Day gave the Western Allies what they'd been fighting for, a foothold in German-occupied France. American, British, Canadian, Polish, and Free French troops stormed the beaches of Normandy, fought their way inland, and linked their beachheads. But after that first shock, the campaign slowed. Normandy's bocage, hedgerows, sunken lanes, tiny fields, turned every kilometre into a fortress. German infantry, backed by panzer divisions, used the terrain perfectly. The result was a brutal, close-range slog. By mid-July, the Allies had suffered heavy losses for relatively little ground, but under the surface, the balance had changed. The Allies had air supremacy, growing stocks of fuel and ammunition, and a steady flow of fresh units. The Germans did not. Every destroyed tank, every veteran lost in a hedgerow stand was almost impossible to replace. To break the stalemate, the Americans launched Operation Cobra in late July, a devastating carpet bombing followed by a concentrated armoured thrust south of St. Lo. The German line, already strained, shattered. Patton's Third Army poured through the breach, spreading across the French countryside. At the same time, British and Canadian forces kept up heavy pressure around Caen, tying down some of Germany's best units. Slowly, the German front in Normandy began to bend, then buckle. Hitler's response was not to pull back, but to attack. On 7th August, he ordered a counter-offensive around the town of Mortain, Operation Lüttich. Several panzer divisions struck west, trying to cut off the Americans and reach the sea. For a moment, it looked dangerous. Then Allied artillery and fighter bombers smashed the assault. The offensive collapsed, and with it went some of Germany's last armoured reserves in Normandy. Now the map showed something ominous. Patton's armour was swinging east and north behind the German front. British, Canadian and Polish forces were pushing south from Caen towards Falaise. Between them, German 7th Army and 5th Panzer Army were being pushed into a shrinking bulge of territory, a bulge that could easily become a pocket. Field Marshal Günther von Kluge, in command of Army Group B, realized the danger. He urgently requested permission to withdraw towards the Seine and avoid encirclement. Hitler refused. Orders were to hold ground and counterattack. In mid-August, the 1st Canadian Army launched Operation Tractable, a push towards Falaise and beyond, conducted with Canadian, Polish and British armoured formations. They fought through stubborn resistance, liberated Falaise, and pressed on towards Troon and Chambois, aiming to slam the door on the German retreat. To the south, American and Free French units drove north towards the same towns. By August 18th to 19th, US, Canadian and Polish troops were within a few kilometres of each other, looking across a valley filled with retreating Germans. The jaws of the trap were almost shut. Only a narrow gap remained, the Falaise Gap, a few kilometres wide, through which tens of thousands of German soldiers were now trying to escape. By 19th August 1944, the Falaise Pocket was a pressure cooker. West of the towns of Falaise, Troon and Chambois, German units were squeezed into a small rectangle of countryside under constant bombardment. The remains of around 20 divisions, infantry, panzer, and SS, were crammed together with their vehicles, guns, and supply columns. There was almost no organization left. Command posts had been overrun or bombed. Units were mixed together. Staff officers, tank crews, cooks and clerks all ended up in the same desperate columns, trying to fight or sneak their way east. Allied artillery rained down on any sign of movement. Fighter bombers prowled overhead, attacking convoys, bridges, and crossroads. The real damage to German armor was often done by artillery and ground fire, but to the men below, the sight of rockets and bombs streaking down from clear skies was terrifying. Every hour spent inside the pocket meant more dead, more wrecked vehicles, more chaos. Model, who had replaced Klug on the 17th of August, focused on one objective: keep the gap open long enough for as many men as possible to escape. German units inside the pocket pushed east. Units outside it pushed west. Between them lay a few villages, some ridges, and increasingly Allied blocking forces. The key to all of it was a single stretch of high ground. Northeast of Chambois stands a long wooded ridge, Mont Ormel, marked on Allied maps as Hill 262. From its summit, you can see much of the pocket and the routes leading out of it. One Polish officer thought the ridge looked like a primitive club on the map. The Poles nicknamed it Mkzuga, the Mace. Whoever held that ridge could dominate the escape corridor. On 19th August, battle groups of the 1st Polish Armoured Division fought their way onto Hill 262. They captured key points on the ridge, destroyed German positions, and dug in. From their new vantage point, Polish observers watched the valley below fill with movement, long lines of German vehicles, guns and troops streaming east under fire. The Germans understood the danger. If the Poles stayed on Hill 262, the pocket would be effectively sealed by fire, even if some ground gaps remained. On 20th to 21st August, elements of several German divisions, including SS Panzer units, launched repeated attacks on the ridge from both inside and outside the pocket. Polish tank crews and infantry held on in brutal close-quarters fighting. They beat back assault after assault, sometimes calling artillery strikes dangerously close to their own positions to break up German concentrations. They ran low on ammunition, fuel, and medical supplies. At times, their battle groups were almost cut off. Down below, the escape attempts continued. German columns tried to dash through what survivors would later describe as a corridor of death, a few kilometers of road and fields where every movement was under observation from Allied guns and, by day, Allied aircraft. Trucks exploded, tanks burned, horses and men died together in ditches already choked with bodies. By midday on the 21st of August, Canadian tanks from the 4th Canadian Armoured Division reached the Polish positions on the ridge. At the same time, Canadian and Polish units linked up with American forces near Coudard-Chambois. The gap was finally closed in force. The Falaise Pocket was now, in every practical sense, shut. When the shooting stopped, the numbers told their own story. Estimates vary, but roughly 50,000 German soldiers were taken prisoner in and around the pocket. At least 10,000 more were killed. Perhaps 20 to 50,000 escaped east, but most did so on foot, leaving behind almost all their heavy weapons, vehicles, and artillery. Allied investigations after the battle counted hundreds of destroyed or abandoned tanks and assault guns, and thousands of burnt-out or wrecked trucks, guns, and wagons. A post-war study found that of the tanks found in the pocket, the vast majority had been destroyed or abandoned by their own crews. For 7th Army and 5th Panzer Army, this was not a setback. It was a disaster. The battlefield itself became notorious. The pocket was littered with the dead, German soldiers, French civilians, cattle and horses. In the summer heat, bodies decomposed quickly. Flies swarmed. The smell of death was so overwhelming that Allied engineers declared parts of the area a health hazard and began bulldozing corpses into mass graves. The Allies paid a price as well. Canadian casualties for the Falaise operations, including Totalize and Tractable, were around 5,500. The Polish 1st Armoured Division alone lost over 1,400 men killed, wounded, or missing in its push to and stand on Hill 262. British, American, and French units also suffered significant losses as they tightened the noose. Yet strategically, the result was decisive. The Battle of Normandy, From D-Day to the closing of the Falaise Pocket, destroyed or shattered more than 40 German divisions in France and inflicted around 400,000 German casualties when the broader campaign is counted. After Falaise, the Wehrmacht in the West was no longer a cohesive force. It was a patchwork of exhausted units trying to delay the inevitable. Within days, Allied troops were advancing on Paris. By the end of August 1944, the French capital was liberated and German forces had retreated behind the Seine. The road to the German border now lay open. The Falaise Pocket was the last stand of Germany's Western armies on French soil. When the pocket closed, Army Group B lost the core of its strength west of the Seine. The units that escaped were hollowed out, short on guns, tanks, vehicles, and hope. For the Allies, Falaise was proof of what coordinated air, armor, and infantry, and the willingness to commit to an encirclement, could achieve even at terrible cost. This is the War Cabinet. Thank you for watching. If you found this documentary helpful, consider subscribing, leaving a comment, or sharing it with someone else who wants to understand how the war in the West was really won.